Well, as usual, and interesting topics, lots of different things to talk through and work through. Um, I do a lot of veneers, so actually, it was last night as I was putting stuff together. I think I had about 200 slides in here, and I've been cutting them out all morning, trying to make more of a point out of it. I think to me, veneers are probably still one of the most aesthetic and best options, right? Minimally invasive and so many different materials to choose from. So the way Jim kind of worded this, I think he really wanted me to kind of talk about different materials and how and why. So let's first start with some of the keys. For one, I think most of you know I'm a photography buff with dentistry, and we need to really have that. When it comes to veneers, there's even more specific reasons why photography is so important, and that's because veneers are really more about microaesthetics than they are about the whole, right? If we're doing big implant cases or larger full mouth cases, um, we have the ability to do more of what we choose to do. When you're working in high aesthetic zones like minimally invasive veneers or full veneers or larger veneer cases, it's more about the microaesthetics, the typography, and the little details. So one of the things that's important, and we'll kind of touch on as we go through our veneers today, is the question of surface typography. Now, I've done some webinars on specifically on surface typography, so I won't go too far into this, except to tell you that for me, one of the most critical aspects of a successful aesthetic case is going to be more of the surface typography, utilizing that. And I think you know from a few of my webinars that probably the biggest struggle we have in that today is in the monolithic world. And I will not show any monolithic veneers because I very rarely do them. I'll show you what I do with them most of the time. One of the challenges is that in this digital world that we're in, the digital transfer of information is changing how we view things. And I would argue that it's kind of a problem for us because if you really look at what digital surfaces look like, and I'm trying to enlarge these for you to see them, I mean, these are what you see on digital prints over and over and over again. And this is not what you see on a good stone cast or in nature. So a lot of times, especially in high aesthetic cases like veneers, it's really important that we're seeing that. So I'll just tell you up front, um, I don't accept veneer cases digitally. Now I know that might sound extreme to some people, but I don't for many reasons, and I'll kind of break them down as we go through it. Doesn't mean that I don't accept digital cast. Of course I do. I have 3 printers upstairs, but when it comes to veneer or single central, that's kind of a line draw for me, where I still want physical impressions because I need the detail that you're seeing on the screen right now. Without that detail, again, look at the printed cast as compared to a real tooth. It's a huge difference for us. So I think that's really important, especially when we're talking about now color and all the details to it. The color is only one aspect, right? The morphology and the surface typography is kind of the second aspect that we're looking for. So I need to look at all those details and kind of be able to work them through in my restorations. And I think you guys already know from a lot of the other webinars I've done on layering and other processes that I'm not an A1 out of the bottle kind of a guy. I know we try to simplify this as best as we can. And yes, the A1 out of the bottle matches the A1 pin the same way the 1M1 does. But when I'm really looking to enhance all the colors that I'm seeing in natural tooth, especially on a single central or on a veneer case, a lot of times I'm doing a lot more additive and mixing as I've gone through, again, before in some of the layering courses. So for a case like this, I wasn't able to take one color out of a bottle. I have to really kind of look through all the processes and try to match what I see in this tooth. And you can see all the colorations that come through here. Now it's my job to make those same colorations work through here. And hopefully I got pretty close with this one, just another implant single central. This is not a veneer, by the way. This is an actual implant case. So point I'm making is when I'm working through these options, I have to have a good understanding of the information that I need in order to make the case work. As far as the actual materials go for the veneers, and let's dive into what Jim's main focus was for me. So there's a lot of different materials out there for us to use, right? There is everything from feldspathic ceramics to feldspathic ceramics that go on substructures like PFM, zirconia, or lithium silicate, or monolithic materials like lithium silicate, disilicate, and zirconia, and then again, layered or micro-layered ceramics that can go on any of those materials, right? So there's a pretty big pool there. What I find, and I think I've showed this slide before, and I think it's an important one to keep in our heads, is that the majority of our profession is kind of working in this area. So that means that if I travel around the world, almost everybody is using lithium disilicate or zirconia, and they're using it for almost everything, right? So whether it's veneers or it's a combination of veneers and other materials, whether they're monolithic or microlayered, this is kind of where about 80% of our profession is working today. I'm going to tell you that for me, I spend much more of my time in this area with feldspathics. Now, those feldspathics go on all these things, and I use them for that. And I also do a lot of regular veneers and window veneers with my feldspathics. And the other materials that I think we're going to start to see a lot more of, that I've been kind of saying for years, is these nano hybrid materials. And these are a big value for us, especially as we're evolving the materials that are have a lot more elasticity to it. They have a better flexural rate. They wear a lot more like natural teeth. So all these things kind of combined make me feel like that's really where our future is going to be. So when I talk about nano hybrid materials, I think in VITA world, I'm really talking about Enamic, and Enamic is a great material. And yes, I've used Enamic for veneers on many occasions. I've used them for long-term provisional veneers. I've also used them for final veneers. And really where I tend to use them is on younger patients. When I have a young patient who either has an issue with the size of their teeth, or they broke or chipped something, and they still have a lot of maturing and growing to do, these veneers actually work well. And I mill these, and then I could just actually stain on them. So nothing is fired, everything is milled, stained, hand texturized and stained up and light cured. So it kind of is an easier system. And in a case like this, like an ameliogenesis type case, I can actually utilize this on a young girl who was only, I think, 15 at the time. And she still has a lot of growing and a lot of augmentation to do. So we want to use this as a long-term solution. And this is where I really like the nano hybrids. And I do a lot of them for younger patients, especially when they broke their teeth or they have some issues. When we get into the silicates and desilicates, I showed you that chart of all the different materials. And what's interesting is, out of all those materials, lithium silicate and disilicate is probably the most used material across the board in dentistry today. I'm not sure if that's good or bad. I don't really know the right way to say it. I will just tell you that most of us already know that we're in lithium disilicate world. One of the challenges we face is value. It's always a struggle for us to maintain the values that we need, especially in that high-end aesthetic type case. And the real reasoning behind that is because the nature of the material, right? Lithium disilicates tend to have a very cigar-shaped like structure to them. And because of that, a lot of light kind of penetrates through the material, and it tends to be a little bit of a lower value material. The milled materials like Suprenity for me in VITA world, or some of the milled lithium silicates, have a little bit more of a tighter niche to them. And that means that optically they have a little bit better optic to them as far as keeping the value going. But in general, the nature of lithium disilicates tends to be a little bit lower value, and we have to kind of compensate for that. So whenever I'm working with lithium disilicates, almost 80% of the time, I'm layering on them. I'd rather go with a very thin little shell and then do some micro layering or even fully layering on them. I'm going fast because I put a lot of slides in, as I always do. But I did skip a little point that I kind of wanted to make when I had that other slide up before about all the different materials. And that was that I said to you that 80% is working in that monolithic or micro layered world. And what's interesting to me is, as I travel around, I hear the same complaint all the time, and that's we can't charge enough for our work. Everybody wants the same thing. We mill it and it's quick, but the pricing isn't there. And I get a little frustrated at it because I feel like it's not really true. I get it that the majority of people want to shop at a certain store, but that doesn't mean that the other stores don't exist, right? So there's a line in front of Gucci all the time. There's quality stores that people are migrating towards and paying more for. And I would just kind of throw out at you that from a small lab like mine, and again, not the greatest ceramist at all, I can tell you that the majority of phone calls we get, and it's quite a bit. I mean, sometimes it's 1 or 2 a week, sometimes it's 10 or 15 in a month. It really depends, and sometimes it's only 2 or 3 in a month. It really depends on the time, I guess. But the point I'm making is the phone calls we get from doctors who would like to work with us are usually because they heard that we still do feldspathic veneers, or because we're layering a lot of our materials. And I think the reasoning behind that is everybody else is doing very similar, meaning that you're milling or designing a digital lithium silicate or disilicate or zirconia, and either micro layering very little or monolithing it and staining and glazing. And I think because everybody's doing the same processes and has the same libraries, there is a bigger market today, or the market has grown back to some feldspathics and some higher end aesthetics. So look, everything kind of circles. I guess if I would have wanted to invest in turntables, and for the younger people there who don't know what turntables are, that was how we listened to music before we had the internet and all those things. If I would have invested in turntables 4 or 5 years ago, I would have said, boy, that's a dumb thing. Nobody will ever put a record on a turntable anymore. Everybody gets their music online. Well, try buying a good turntable today. They're a fortune. And what is happening is people are going back to the old way of listening to music from a different perspective, with a turntable and a needle and a record player where it has a different quality of sound to it than we get. Point I'm making is, let's not only look at the future, let's look at the history of where we come from and how we can evolve through that process to make all our materials. There is no one material. I guess that's really the statement I'm making. We, as an educated technician force, have to be able to help our clinical partners, and as an educated clinical partner, have to be able to understand that there is not one size that fits every patient, and our job is to work our way through it. So when I work through my cases, I do them the same way all the time. I look at the patient's face, I look at where the incisal edge belongs, and I try to evaluate what we could do to help that patient, not only aesthetically, but functionally. So this case was an interesting case because he was obviously very unhappy with his teeth, and he presented to an office, and the office was kind of ready to put some veneers on it. And when myself and my partner doctor got a look at this, we were like, no, wait a second. There's a lot of little issues here that we're going to need to work through. So this actually wound up being an orthodontic case that we moved the teeth around. And as we moved the teeth around to protect our future occlusal workforce and our future veneers, we basically opened up his envelope and created a little bit more space. And once we did that, now this is kind of a simple veneer case. So we treated this with lithium disilicate veneers, both maxillary and mandible, and monolithic restorations in the posterior. So again, a combination of a little micro layering and a little bit of monolithic materials. But in that anterior, I really wanted that micro layering. So great impressions as always. These were waxed, invested and pressed, as you can see here. And the goal of this was to press them in a way where I could do some little bit of micro layering. So I took those pressed materials, I layered on them with the new Lumex material, and then finished them up, both upper and lower. And the posteriors bicuspid back were all monolithic materials. So I finished them up, polished, glazed, all the normal things, and then we'll send these off to the office to have these placed. And in the end, the case was a fairly nice case, but this is a nice example of utilizing some of the lithium disilicate materials and some of the monolithic materials that we can use in a combination. So I want the aesthetics in the anterior, but I'm okay with some of the colorations in the posteriors. And that case worked out fairly nicely. A perfect example of the lithium disilicate, both micro-layered, layered, and monolithic. The other materials that I think are interesting is milled ceramic materials. So I've showed this case a million times before. I'll just run through it very quickly again. But this was a case where we were just going to do micro veneers or minimally invasive veneers, I should say, on the cuspid and lateral. He probably needed a lot more work than that, but we were going to leave his functionality where it was. He just wanted to fill the spaces. So because of the space that I had to fill, it wasn't a tremendous amount of space, meaning that I didn't have a short prep that had a lengthen 4 or 5 millimeters of ceramic to. I was very comfortable using a feldspathic material, but I was even more comfortable using a feldspathic milled material. So what I actually wound up doing here was, after the preparations were done, a nice chamfer prep and then an elbow prep, which is really critical here for our restorative process. And that critical elbow that we're creating is very important, especially when you're not breaking contacts. So you'll notice here that the contact area is not broken, but yet we've created a deep elbow. These type of preparations, the reason that I won't do this digitally is because it's very difficult for the scanner to capture that non-broken contact margin. So for me, that's where I kind of cut the ties with digital there, because I really need this contact area to stay, and this marginal finish line that is going to be very difficult to repeat, not only in a printed model, but also in the scanned. So for me, that's again the area where I don't want a digital impression for these, but I do want that nice deep elbow for those. So I'm not going to go into all the light and things that we've kind of gone through this in layering before. What I really want to get to is all the different options that Jim tagged me with. So just be clear again that because we have no broken contact and we're using minimally invasive, this is really the reasoning behind not going with scanners for these types of impressions. So I designed these digitally, even though I had a physical impression. The impression was then scanned. I milled out my Mark II material, which is another VITA material. It's basically feldspathic ceramic, and it's fabulous. It's really one of my favorite materials because I have the ability to mill this very thin, as you can see how thin they are. I think most of you know that if you're applying any staining materials to feldspathic, they really kind of suck in and grab to the material much better than they do with some lithium silicates and with zirconium materials. And then if I want to layer, I can. I could just layer either VM9 or Lumex material right on it. I don't have to put it in peg putty or build it up in any way. I could just layer right on this little milled veneer, or I could stain and glaze. So it's really a nice process. And in this case, I don't really think I did much layering. Maybe I added a dot of contact or something somewhere, but this was really just a stain and glaze case, which makes it kind of nice. So a milled feldspathic veneer, business model of doing feldspathic veneers again, more than just monolithic materials. And technically it's a monolithic material, but it's a feldspathic monolithic, and some really nice results. So I think for me, this is still one of my favorite materials for micro veneers. But if I have my way, for the majority of my veneer cases, feldspathic is still where I'm at. And whether that's a VM material or a Lumex material, whatever material you're using, I still think that the layered is the best. So I walked through this case in a layering webinar a few months ago, and I pulled it out. So I won't go through all the layering details again, but I just want to be clear that why I think a layering option is so good for us is because all the abilities I have when I look at a patient. So again, face, white, pink. I want to understand where all the aspects are. We're going to look at the coloration. The patient was very unhappy with their little black triangle and the chipping and the discolorations. So we're going to treat this as a minimally invasive for veneer case. And just to be clear on these cases, I'm not interested in the, what do we call it, the aesthetic 6 or the Hollywood 6, right, where you do 6 veneers. I very rarely do that today. For me, it's either 2, 4, or 8, 10, 12s. I try not to do 6s because 6s really never look proper. They don't really blend well with the rest of the arch. So in this case, we limited it to 4, which was fine. We wax and provisionalize. I'm going with the refractory case here. And Jim, I didn't forget you asked me something about refractories. I will send you those slides. Um, I'm using an alveolar cast, which Abraham here in my office spends so much time getting these ideal and perfect. And these alveolar casts, we have removable dies that can be a solid stone die or a refractory die. In this case, I'm going refractory. Now, in the title, just to be clear, Jim also asked for foil. I have to be honest and tell you, I very, very rarely foil. There is nothing wrong with foil. It's a good technique. It's actually probably one of the smarter business techniques, right? Because you buy the foil and then down the road you can repurpose it for scrap and utilize it again. So it's actually a great process. But for me, I learned on refractory. I've kind of mastered the refractory part of it. And when I have to foil, it's like, oh no, where's my foil tools? Because I'm just not great with it. I've taken a few courses with great people and they've showed me, but I guess because in my mind, I'm always thinking that the refractory has such a better fit and such better manageability for removing and maintaining the tissue and all the little details. Obviously, when I work with a foil, if you look at this cast that I have, the alveolar cast, I wouldn't be able to get my foil margin right there without taking away all that tissue. So that aspect to me, the fact that we lose the tissue or we lose the information has been another reason that I've kind of shied away from the foils over the years, besides the fact that I kind of stink at them. But truth of it is, I want the most information. And the most information is having my tissue cast, which for me goes back to refractory dyes rather than foil. Nothing wrong with foil, by the way. I'm not knocking the foil people. It's a good technique. I just prefer refractory. So as I'm working through my cases, you'll see I'll start with my opacious materials. I'll do usually some sort of a wash bake, setting up my chroma, my value, same like you would with foil, by the way, right? When you do your first foil, you usually do a little bit of a wash bake. You'll refabricate that foil into the die, and then you'll go back and do your major buildup. Exact same with refractory. I do a little bit of a wash bake. I set that on the die, and then I'll come back and do my main buildup. So like I said, I won't go too far into the buildup. I think you guys will get concepts already because I've done this so many times where I always want more chroma in the cervical. I want to brighten that middle third and get that value up. And then that incisal edge is really about the age and the effect that we're looking to create in our buildup. So I'll follow that step all the way through from my initial opacious materials to my dentin materials and then to my translucent materials. And then I'll finalize that with my mamelon materials, where I'm going to utilize those mamelon materials to really help me create that translucencies or those effects that I'm looking for in what we call that transition zone right about here. And again, that's the beauty of feldspathics, right? Is I have the ability to really do that. Just like sit back for a second and think about the value of what I'm saying to you. Let's pretend that the blue that you see here and the white that you see here is all one monolithic material. Well, every color, everything that I'm putting in, I am now painting on the surface. So I paint a little chroma here. I try to bump up the value here. I try to paint in my mamelon materials here. And by the way, I've seen people make them look beautiful, but it really does depend on the ingot selection you've chose and the amount of space you actually have to work in. When you're working in 0.3, 0.5, I think the monolithics really work well because when you're working in those areas, you're really replacing the enamel that used to exist. Once we get past more than 0.3 to 0.5 and you have more space to fill, that's not monolithic to me. I have to have some sort of layering, micro layering to fill the space properly. And I'm looking to do the same things over and over again. I'm always looking to create my chroma, my value, and that transition area where I have that aesthetic look of mamelons and translucencies and all the little detail things that I really like to get out of that. And I also will just throw out there that I also get from a business perspective as I travel around and I work with different laboratories, I do hear a lot of the same complaints. And some of that complaint is usually, well, nobody works with a brush anymore. Nobody understands the powders anymore. I get that. But in truth, nobody knows how to design a tooth either until we teach them. And the problem is when you have somebody come in from the street or somebody who wants to be in our environment, we're making the mistake of giving them a mouse and teaching them how to design something digitally without showing them the cause and effect of morphology and shape and form. So look, we had this same problem 30 years ago, right? You have a new technician who comes into your business, and what did you do? You put them in the mono and die department. I argued 30 years ago, and I'll argue it today. That's the most important department in our laboratories is mono and die, whether it's manual or digital. It's the most critical. So to act like you could take the beginner person and make them just do one of the more challenging tasks is silly. My advice to us is give people a spatula, give them a brush, and let's get them building more of the teeth. This way, when they utilize digital, they have a better understanding of how and when to use it. And the value of them will be much better down the road because they'll have the ability to do a little bit of everything, not just mill, staining, glaze. We need more. So I'll finalize all my dentins. I'll come back and I'll use some enamel materials. And now I'm using my enamels as filtrations to mask out what I've done in my dentin window, or I'm using my window to cover my dentins is probably a better way to say that. I'll finalize that so I have the best light transfer, and then I have my finished veneers, and I'll send those back to my clinical partner, and they'll be able to start placing them. Also, you'll notice the management here was really good, and what I mean by that is, look at how nice the tissue looks when they took off their provisionals, right? That's a great sign that the clinical partner really managed it well. And now when they go to place the veneers, it's a nice fit. Look how nice that veneer almost sucks up right to the tissue, right? You can already see some of the coloration of the prep shade coming through. And again, with a monolithic material, you don't have that same luxury because you have one thickness of material. I'm probably sounding anti-monolithic, and I don't mean to sound that way. All I'm trying to show you is that there's many ways to get to where you want to go to. I choose more in the layering world. It doesn't mean that I've never done monolithic veneers. I have, and I'll do more. I think I have 2 cases on my desk right now that will be pure monolithic. But realize that I'm trying to choose the material for the amount of space I'm working in. 2/10 to 5/10 monolithic works really well, especially with lithium silicates and D-silicates if I choose the right ingot. Once I get past that area and I'm dealing with a little bit more space, 0.8, 1 millimeter, depending if there was existing veneers that have been taken off, I really need to be in more of at least a micro layered world where I can increase values and colors and translucencies, and I can actually utilize my materials to do what you're seeing here. Look at the coloration on the number 8, and look at how as soon as we place this, you can actually start to see some of that coloration come through. And then I can control the value and the surface topography and all the details that I want. So this is on insertion. These little spaces will fill up as she heals, and she was still numb there. So all that will start to fill in and make it work nicely. And that's pure feldspathic, and I'm really kind of happy in that feldspathic world. It doesn't mean that every case has to be a major layered case. A case like this where a young patient, she's 26 years old, she was getting married a few months from now, and she hated the fact that her teeth looked so, she called them childish. It made her look young, and it does. It makes her look very young because of the spaces and the length and the missed proportions here. So we don't want to prep those teeth. They're beautiful. She's not going to go back through ortho because she's getting married in a few months. So we did the most minimally invasive thing we could do. That was to do a little tiny enamelplasty on the 8 and 9. So just shave off a tiny, tiny bit of the incisal edge to straighten them out. I asked my doctor just to pack a little bit of cord around the marginal areas, and I'm going to treat these as window veneers. Now, I could have done these either with Mark II material, or I could have also done them with a Supranity or a lithium silicate material, or D-silicate material for that matter. I could have gone any route with them. I chose to do them refractory a few years back, probably just because I was more comfortable. If I was redoing this case today, this is probably 100% a Mark II case for me, really, because I'm not really changing anything more than filling a little bit of space in some areas. But feldspathic,ly this worked out very nice. So I did it on refractory dies. I devested these little window veneers, or these little window chips. Then you can see as I slide them into the patient's mouth how we're kind of changing the shape and the form of that tooth, so it looks a little more wide for her face and fits her face better. And in the end, that's all we wound up doing was 4 little chips on her. And you can see the difference in the face, right? 26 years old. She was here at the time. I think she's 30-ish now, or 32 maybe. But point I'm making is little changes, right? Little tiny changes with a material like feldspathic that we can make is really fabulous. And again, I could do this in a lithium silicate today. I don't think I'd have an issue doing that. I would just have to be really cautious in my choice. When I have these smaller spaces, a lot of times for me, I go back to the feldspathic again because I feel like I could do the most in it. So a case like this, patient has beautiful teeth, beautiful face, and really just was unhappy with the spacing here. I wish we would have did a little window veneer on the cuspids and then the veneer on the lateral. We didn't prescribe it that way. Looking back, I think there was a mistake. We probably should have added a window veneer to the cuspids, but we did wind up treating this with one veneer. So the space management was really challenging. So we make our alveolar model as we normally would. And then from that alveolar model, I'm making my refractory dies. The refractory die slips in and out very nicely, so I have something to work on. And you can see how much of a space I actually had here. And this is why I kind of regret that I didn't kind of stop the case here and opt to put a window veneer on the cuspid. But she was very happy and it worked out. So I start with my basic buildup, my opacious dentin to mask some of the air or the space of the transition from the die to air. I'll jump into some dentin materials. In this case, I'm using either a transpod dentin or a real dentin, depending on how much space I'm trying to fill. I usually want to always brighten up the center of the tooth, so I want a little bit more value in this area. So I'll pop my dentin up, meaning that if I was working in 1M1, I might jump to an OM here, right, an OM2 or something, where I could really push that value a little bit. And then I'll finalize that with my enamels, and I'll finalize those veneers. So in the end, I'll try to make them look as thin as possible to manage the space, but I think, I would have been better off with a little window veneer on the cuspid, and we'll send those back for insert. And in the end, they worked. Again, from the lateral view, they look a little wide, but when you see her up front, it really works, right? And that's really what she wanted, was just to manage that space a little bit better, so when she smiled, she didn't feel conscious of it. And that's what we'll try to do. And lastly, I'll leave us with some combination cases. I did go fast, so you see I'm slowing down as we get to the end, because I always put so many slides that I never know if I have too many or too little. Now I can relax and slow down since I see I'm on track. Combinations are, I think, really more the challenging scenarios, and that's when we want to use monolithic materials or we want to mix materials. So for me, in this case, I'm going to actually do a little bit of both. I'm going to use some monolithic materials in the posterior and some feldspathic veneers in the anterior. This is Liz, by the way, and you can see that Liz has a really big smile. When she gets up there, you can see she shows a lot of everything from the gum tissue and a lot of tooth, and she's got a great boisterous personality. So we have to kind of think through all of that, and this is why the concept of face, white, and pink is so critical for us, so we can really kind of evaluate all the processes. Also, Liz has a great lip dynamic, meaning that when she's talking and speaking, you can see that she still shows some incisal edge, but the more she talks, she has a lot of differential in her lip dynamic. So maybe her right side pulls up a lot more sometimes, and as the more she gets animated in her speaking, the more teeth she really starts to show. So it's really important for us that we manage that space well. And in her biggest smile and when she's laughing and really kind of letting go, you can see she shows a lot of pink. And that was problematic too for us, because look at the size of these bicuspids, right? So when I look at that little tiny tooth, all I'm thinking is I don't really want to lengthen this very much. I really like to lengthen it gingivally. So this for us becomes about where do the teeth belong in this patient's face. We already kind of like the incisal edge position, although I'd be okay if we lengthen that maybe 0.5, maybe even almost a millimeter to give her a little bit more length. And the other etiology in her case is there was some chemical wear, meaning that it's not just about the aesthetic process, that we're going to have to manage these teeth that she has and manage through the chemical wear. So they're going to have to be covered. But at the same time, she's young. I don't want this to be full coverage if they don't have to be. So this is why the combination materials is starting to become more challenging for us, because I'm already knowing that I want to stay something very monolithic and very thin here in the posterior, but she's very demanding on what she wants in the aesthetic zone. I shouldn't say she was very demanding. She actually wanted a very monolithic, kind of a whiter tooth. So I did have the freedom to kind of treat it, but I also know she wanted it to be a brighter, whiter tooth. So I felt more comfortable going with a monolithic Vonleh in the posteriors and a layered veneer in the anterior, both on the maxillary and the mandible. So we'll look at her teeth. We'll decide that, okay, we might want to lengthen that incisal edge a little tiny bit. And that's kind of where we're thinking that, we'll get a little bit more of that incisal edge position, but really what we want is to bring the gum line up. I'd like to get a little bit more out of her gum, especially on the 8 and 9, but definitely on the 3, the 4, 5, and the 12, 13, so I could balance out that smile a little bit more for that big smile. So we'll do that by using my normal technique. The normal technique for us is a facial analyzer. I then want to put that on my horizontal table. I'm going to drop the table down 1 or 2 millimeters, depending on how much I'm lengthening the incisal edge. And then I'll start my wax up. And that's exactly what we did here, where we did a diagnostic wax up now to the horizontal plane that we wanted, and then to the gingival position that I would like to create. You'll also notice that the upper and lower was done at the same time. And that as I work through, I'm kind of following the sequence of what I was already setting up before, meaning that I'm just going to basically wax to what I think it should be as I work through my process of what we're changing. Once I've done that, then it's easy to communicate with my clinical partner. We already know where the teeth belong, so I can give her, in this case it was Dr. Bernadette, I can give her a little bit of a surgical guide or a matrix so she could see where the tissue should be, and she can go in there and electrosurge to start managing the bones. So she'll go in there, she'll electrosurge away the tissue, and then she'll either flap or chisel, depending on how many teeth she needs to do, a position for that new gingival margin for us. In this case, she flapped, as you can see, and she'll develop the bone relationship to where we want that final pink marginal interface to be. I think most of us all know that there's a 3 millimeter biological width there that we want to kind of stay working in. So once we've decided where the tissue will be, we want to make sure that our bone level is 3 millimeters away. Okay, so we'll finish up the crown lengthening. We'll let our patient heal a little bit. And even walking around healing, you can see it doesn't look too bad. It's just, it's a little bit of puffiness as the patient's healing up. And then as time comes in, a few weeks go by, the papilla starts to fill back down. We now have the new free gingival margin where we like it to be. And we're going to provisionalize it. We're going to prep and provisionalize the patient based on our original wax up. So wax up now is in the patient's mouth. Cord is packed and impression is taken. You can see we're kind of full coverage and then Vonleh and then veneer. So we have a little bit of everything happening here. And the reasoning that we did go full coverage on a few of the teeth was because of the chemical wear, that we wanted to cover the tooth fully to protect against any caries in the future. So cord pack was done. What's really critical here, and you can notice the impression, I think this is really an important point for us, especially in any restoration, but definitely in veneer world, is look at how nice of a shoulder was created, and you can see that in the impression. And I want to make sure I have the space that I need in my materials. It doesn't always need to be as thick as you're seeing here, but it's a great example of looking at what I'm seeing and working through my materials, and then utilizing that for my emergence profile back on the cast. I can't stress enough this, it's funny, one of the other many pet peeves that I have is in digital world. I think what a lot of doctors are learning in school today is that the scanner does everything for you. So you prep a tooth, you take the scanner out, and you start scanning. What's really being missed is we still have to manage the prep position, the marginal finish line, and we still have to move the tissue out of the way to be able to get the tissue where we need it to be to capture the information and the impression. And it was funny, I was lecturing last week with Dr. Bernadette actually, and in the audience was 10 or 15 residents that are in one of the residency programs. And as I said this in passing, the instructor, the residents kind of raised their hand and she said, please talk more about this, because she felt like the students came out of school and didn't really get a good grasp on the importance of managing tissue. So in order for us to do our jobs with whatever material that we use, whether it's milled, feldspathic, lithium silicate, if you did foil or refractory, it doesn't matter. You can't get any of those results without having the tissue management where you want it. And that all comes from managing it on the clinical side of the coin. So really important for us. So you can see great management here. Provisionalization is done here. Shade is taking, and usually my clinical partners are jotting down what they've done for provisionals, meaning they use bisacryl B1 or whatever the color they used. I'd like to see that in the mouth so I have some influence of not only how much color is coming through marginally, but what that coloration looks like against their tissue and in the face. So once that's done, I'll go back to treating this as refractory veneers. And you can see really why I wanted refractory veneers here. Look at the amount of space I have to fill, not only interproximal, but incisal. And this is why a monolithic material wouldn't have done that well for me, because I'm only going to have 0.6 the most here on the facial, but I need a millimeter and a half here to fill. How do I manage that? Which is the right ingot that can do both of those things, that can give me the opacity that I need and yet can give me the translucency I need at a different thickness. So this is why I opted for feldspathic, even though I went monolithic from bicuspid back. So again, micro layering, I build up my opacious dentin, my dentin materials, and I start to shape that dentin canvas. And then I'll go right to my mamelon materials with a little bit of a blue translucent, a mamelon 1 or a mamelon 2. Maybe I use a effect chroma sometimes, depending on what I'm looking to create in my mamelon structure. Again, she didn't want a lot of translucency. So if you kind of look here, it's interesting because you'll notice my mamelons are really close together, right? I didn't create a lot of big translucent space. And the reason I did that is because she wanted a whiter, brighter, more monochromatic, not much translucency. So this way, when I get here, you can see that I don't have tons of this bluish gray translucency because she just didn't want that. I would have liked it, but she didn't. So in the end, we'll finish her up. This is her final result a few weeks after insertion. And you can see how much tooth she shows. I mean, there's a lot of teeth that she's showing there. And we gave her what she wanted, which was a big, white, bright smile that fulfilled it. And you also hopefully notice the transition between the feldspathic ceramic and the lithium silicate ceramic. So a little bit of a combination case for us. And I think it worked out very well. So with that said, Jim, I ran through the beginning a little fast, but I think that gives us some good time. So I always try to finish at the 50-minute mark, so I'm 46 minutes, not too bad. Gives us some time for questions. So with that said, thank you for a great group. And let's see if you have some questions out there.
Well, thanks, Peter. You covered everything I was expecting, so I appreciate that. I know some people still use foil. It's not very used that much because we have all those alternatives, right? Milling, and then also we continue to do refractory, which a lot of people are using that as well. So one of the first questions we do have is, as always, what refractory material do you use?
Yeah, so we switched to the, I think it's the Schutz material now. It's getting it from Germany. I know they're trying to distribute it here in the States, but I think they've established a place to distribute it here. So if you want, email me and I'll give you some. I'll forward you the information to buy it from them. Although I think I've still got the last batch from Germany.
All right. So just before we also get into too many more questions, let me finish this up as well. CE, those of you who have requested about CE, we'll take care of that. We'll go ahead and send you out the letter, the needed letter, and or the right information to the CE authority, whether it's Florida and or the NBC. The workshop was recorded, the webinar, so give us a couple days. It'll be posted on the VITA North America YouTube channel as well. If you need to get a hold of any of VITA personnel, here's some information here. And again, you can always go back and visit this on the webinar, the recording on the website. We do have additional webinars the rest of this year. We have several more slated, scheduled with Peter, so we appreciate it, Peter. We also are starting on the 2025 webinars, the scheduling, and then also we have 2025. We have some Germany workshops in May and June as well. This is, of course, Peter's information there. All right, so other information, questions, what would you do to block out a discolored prep so it doesn't show through?
Yeah, so my thought process on this has really changed and evolved over the years, right? Back in the day, we were trying to figure out how to mask it in our materials, and it doesn't mean you can't do that. But to be honest with you, I think it was a mistake. Realistically, our new protocol here in my office and most of the doctors that I work with is the opposite. They're masking it intraoral before their impression. So the best example I can give you, let's say you're doing an 8 and 9. The 8 has a post in it, a post in core, and it's really dark. Well, if the doctor takes an impression of those two, you have to start really thinking through what material can I use to mask that really instantaneously and still create the depth. It's kind of a silly concept, so we do the opposite. The doctor's job now has become, and putting more onus back on the clinical side, is we want them to mask that, and they could use something like Speed Sam or Panavia or whatever they would like. I prefer they mask it with a similar color, meaning that if the prep shade on the 9 was A2, then use an A2 opacious cement to kind of mask that prep. It's a curable material, and then when they impression, what we're getting is the 2 ideal colored preps. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit longer answer. Sorry, Jim, because I know what most people are thinking as I say that. My doctors aren't going to do that. That's an excuse. Make your doctors do it because it'll make your life easier. But if you have a case already and you don't have that option to go backwards, then you're going to need to look through the materials. Sometimes metal ceramics is still one of the best options. Very thin metal coping, and that allows me to kind of use a ceramic margin and layer as much as I want. Or if I'm going with zirconia or lithium silicate, what really has to happen is I have to get a much more opacified ingot or block or a puck, and then try to make it as thin as I can so I still have some layering room, because the thicker I make it and the more opacified it is, the uglier your final restoration is going to be. So that's why I've kind of shifted the game and made it more of a clinical responsibility than a laboratory responsibility.
Yeah, thanks. I think, as always, you always point out that, look, you got to take a case by case look at the case and decide just because it says a veneer here or feldspathic or it says lithium disilicate, you have to evaluate. It's all our responsibility to evaluate it and figure out the right material that's going to make your work look the best, and the dentist as well in front of the patient.
I mean, it's the partnership. The partnership is having an opinion and knowing your materials to communicate with your partners about what's right or wrong for each case we work on.
Yeah. Another question is, what is the minimum thickness for milling Mark II or Trilux Forte veneers?
Man, I've milled them at like 0.2 of a millimeter. I've milled them really thin. I say I mill them. Jen mills them for me most of the time, and I can tell you she's milled them so thin sometimes that I'm like, Jen, make it a little thicker just so I have some room to play with. I mean, I've milled them like 2-3 tenths of a millimeter, so you can mill them pretty thin.
And then follow-up question: after you mill them, how do you treat the margins? Do you adjust the margins, and if so, what kind of instruments do you use, or do you thin them out? In other words,
Yeah, I got you. So very, very carefully, we're getting some really great milled fits. And the other beauty of milling with them is that they're fairly efficient, right? It's a wet mill, and I can mill that veneer in anywhere from 9 to 14 minutes, which is really great because there are times that I've milled them so thin that I pop a hole in one and I'm like, I need another one. No problem. I mill it 10 minutes later, it's in my hands, and that's kind of nice. When I get to the actual finalizing of the margin, I'm really going more with aggressive rubber wheels than anything else because I don't want to put any pressure on that. So I'm using like those coarser blue rubber wheels or the lighter blue rubber wheels, depending on how finite I am, and then finalizing it with a pink rubber wheel. So it's really more rubber wheel finishing. And I'm getting, out of my mill pretty close to perfect. I'm not doing a lot more hand manipulation besides for surface topography and defining line angles.
and then of course, like those prepless veneers or semi-prep veneers at the margins on the facial there, you probably have your doctor thin them out, blend them in after he bonds them, right?
Yeah, so with a window veneer is different than marginal finishing for the milled veneer, right? With a window veneer, I'm actually extending my transparency further than I want it to be. And I don't really care what that edge looks like because it's not important at that moment. When the doctor places it and bonds it, he or she will then polish away that little extra translucency area to make it blend in.
Okay, and then always about refractory. How do you seal the refractory material? What method do you use? Do you use a glaze and high fire it? Do you use a porcelain? Do you use
So I was back in the day using the connector paste, the GC product. I don't use it anymore. I don't find with the newer refractory materials, which by the way devest so much easier and are so much nicer. I don't really feel I need it anymore. So I'm really just conditioning my refractory, burning it up to a high temperature. And depending on the ceramic, and I'll be upfront with you guys, certain ceramics, like I find the metal ceramics, like if I'm using BM13 or something along those lines, really grab on much better. So I could do a bigger wash base. When I get into the lithium, the silicate ceramics or the zirconia ceramics, they grab fine, but you do need to do a little bit less of a wash bake. So in other words, on my first bake on those materials, I'll just do around the margin, kind of wash it up and a little lengthening on it. But if I use like VM13 or a PFM material, I can actually build like 3/4 of the crown and fire it. I don't get much pulling in the way. So I've gotten away from putting glazed materials and connector paste on it, and I'm just kind of going straight to the die.
okay? And then follow up with the window veneer. When you say window veneer, should I assume that it has more to do with the blending to the enamel as opposed to your use of window porcelain? Are you using mostly enamel for the material?
Yeah, so it's a good way to say that, right? Because the concept of a window veneer has nothing to do with window ceramic, right? It's about a contact lens. And when you put a contact lens in your eye, there's only one part. If you colorize it, the rest of it is clear. So that's kind of the idea behind a window veneer is that you're utilizing either value or color or opacity where you want it, but the rest of it that sits over the tooth is fairly clear. And yes, that would be a window ceramic or super translucent material. The only thing that's cautious about that is the goal of any of those windows is to extend the window further than you need it. Because what you don't want, and I'm using my hands to kind of show. Let's say this area here has opacity to it, and I put a little bit of translucency here. I want to make sure I put more translucency because when the doctor bonds it in, they're going to polish this area. So if I put it too close to the surface, as they start polishing, you'll see the line of demarcation where the color or opacity kind of kicks in.
Okay, that makes sense. We did have a couple of questions or comments about you had a couple of cases that had the red lines, horizontal or vertical.
Mhm.
Can you explain what those are used for?
Yeah, so on refractory dies, I'm using a marking pencil. It's the high heat, pencils we used to use years ago. I think they're harder to get these days. I mark those right on my refractory dies as I'm conditioning them. The purpose of that is it's kind of a measuring tool for me. So I'll give you an example. The prep shade is perfect. It's A1. The doctor's looking for A1-ish or 1M1-ish. And I only have a few tenths of a millimeter to work in. So what I want to do is I'm going to put those lines on my refractory, and as I'm building, when I fire, if I want to see the prep shade through it, those lines help me see how translucent my ceramic material is. On the flip side, let's say that the prep shade is A4 and I'm trying to get to an A1. Well, when I put those lines on and I start to fire my ceramic, I want to not see those lines in my first, second fires. I want to start masking those areas. So I'm really just using it as a measuring stick for me.
Okay. And then one of the last questions is when you use refractory and you add your porcelain, do you fire a little bit higher in temperature to compensate for the refractory?
No, it's funny. That's a good question, and I love all the refractory questions, by the way. It's funny because years ago, Michel was here. Michel Monnier was with me for a while, and he was kind of tweaking his numbers on some of the tweaking because of the refractory. Obviously, it sucks up some heat. I haven't manipulated that number very much over the years. Now, let's be clear, the refractory dies are really small, and I'm usually firing 4, 6, 8, 10 at a time. And I'm firing in great furnaces, right? I mean, I have the VITA furnaces, and I have really high quality furnaces that I feel like really control the temperature well. If you wanted to tweak it a few degrees here and there, I'm okay with it. I haven't seen the need to tweak it that much. And I think it's because my dies are so small and tapered
Yeah.
that they're not really kind of taking up too much of the heat. And I'm using a really high quality furnace that allows it to maintain the heat it needs for the proper baking.
All right. Well, Peter, I thought that was an excellent presentation. I appreciate you always spending the time to educate everybody, including me. So, like
Thank
that.
you.
I want to thank everybody for joining us. Remember that you can go back and visit the webinars that Peter does on the VITA North America YouTube channel. We've probably got 30, 40 plus. We're going to do some more in 2025, I hope, Peter, if you're good with that. We'll add additional topics. So if you're interested in different topics that maybe you'd like Peter to go over, please send them to the marketing department here at VITA North America, and we'll add those to the list. And Peter, any last minute words?
No, it's good to see you. I haven't seen your face in a while, and thank you. And I always think I joke about the same thing that you kind of make up these topic titles, and I kind of love it because it's like a new challenge every time. So I always kind of enjoy it. And if you guys have any more topics that you want to put out there, send them to me or Jim, and we'll kind of put them in for 2025.
Yep, great. So thank you again, Peter. I hope you have a great day, and I hope the everyone attending has a great day wherever you may be. And this will end today's webinar. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Jim. Take care, everybody.